Yeah, so Dave Ripplinger, bioenergy, uh, biomaterials economic specialist. I'm going to talk about carbon dating. I'm actually going to give kind of an introduction before I get to market activities, just to be clear on what we're talking about with carbon. So we hear a lot of different terms, and there's been a lot of new terms that have come up in the last few years related to carbon and all this climate stuff. So, for example, the title of this presentation had carbon in it. And of course, I'm sure we remember carbon from junior high as an element, basis for life. We're in the life business in agriculture. It's a huge part of our economy, part of modern society, giving us energy materials that we need. And then finally, the last piece is atmospheric carbon. And one of the reasons we talk about carbon is this relationship, because as we've been using fossil fuels for the last 170 years or so, the carbon that was stored in the geology is now in the atmosphere as CO2, as carbon dioxide. We can think about this too, you guys talk about soil carbon and the like. With kind of that same idea. It's that carbon that we're concerned about. It's the common element, even though we might be most concerned, or folks who are most concerned about climate, think about CO2 in the atmosphere. So looking at a variety at a really high level of different things that are going on in this carbon space, these carbon markets, there's different folks who are paying the bills to different extent, and different folks who've made commitments to paying the bills. So we have the private sector. This would be primarily carbon offsets, which I'll define in a minute. Due to US tax policy, taxpayers are going to pick up part of this bill, have been picking up part of this bill. And then for certain cases, for example, people who buy fuel in California, those consumers end up paying a price for low carbon fuels. Kind of continuing on with this introduction, so the folks who are buying, what they want is some sort of event or activity that they can point to that resulted in a change measured in metric tons of CO2. So it can happen a couple of different ways. So I can reduce my emissions. So for example, on farm, if you change the fertilizer that you use, for example, from a traditional nitrogen fertilizer made with steam methane reformation to something made with green energy, with wind, that would be a reduction. You can avoid it by not pursuing or being involved in a certain activity, and then also, both on farm and off farm, capturing and storing that carbon. And again, it's CO2 for most intents, but it could just be carbon itself. I don't spend too much time talking about it. The two big ways to address climate with ag is soil organic carbon, getting the carbon from the atmosphere into the soil, some degree of permanence. The alternative is to take the carbon from the atmosphere, get it into a corn plant, get that kernel to a refinery, produce ethanol via fermentation. Fermentation produces CO2, get that CO2 into geology. But if we're talking about corporations, the folks who are doing this, so this would be a Microsoft or a Disney, what they want to do at the end of the year is have a big bundle of evidence that says we did something or we paid a price to have this many metric tons of CO2 credits. So the question is why? I mean, the big high-level drivers, there's concerns about climate. And this is working its way, hitting certain folks sooner rather than later, so it's hitting corporations before it hit you. Pretty pragmatic reasons for why these different corporations are doing, and part of it is because of shareholder, board, or outside pressure, so to speak, like environmental concerns, climate concerns. But a lot of them are just getting ready, knowing, especially looking at Europe, of regulations that do exist, that do apply to them, or will likely be adopted here in the United States in the next decade or so. A lot of companies are concerned about finding financing. This was a bigger deal beginning about 4 years ago. Risk management, and this could be related to regulation. Just folks concerned about, how the market might change, or how regulations might change, what that means to the bottom line. And then, of course, we also have marketing. So these businesses doing some marketing, saying, "Hey, we're a environmentally friendly company." Looking at how we do the math for corporations, there's accounting standards that have been developed, pretty robust, and essentially what they do is they create a framework to calculate emissions for a business. And it's important to know, especially what's called scope 3. But beginning at the top, so scope 1 is direct emissions, so emissions that a business has directly. Scope 2 would be indirect, so that would be emissions from the inputs they buy, such as electricity. And then finally, scope 3 is the whole supply chain. And so the example of this for production ag is you have on-farm emissions. So I use diesel fuel, I apply nitrogen fertilizer, those would be direct emissions. You might buy a little bit of power. We don't have, confined animal feeding operations like a lot of the folks, so that's typically a small one. But scope 3 is really big. So scope 3 goes back all the inputs you bring to your farm, the crops that you grow, the elevator it goes to, all the way to that final consumer. That's scope 3. So you right now aren't subject to this, but companies that you work with directly or indirectly are. And so your ag chemical company thinks about you because you're in their scope 3. The folks who might buy your wheat, making flour, bread, whatever the final products might be, they think about you because you're in their supply chain. Really, really important. And these are the folks who are being regulated or at this forefront. So they're getting hit first, but they're certainly bringing this to production ag rather quickly. So looking at carbon offsets and some of the opportunities, one of the questions is why ag? The truth is, today, objectively, there's no better way to do it. So nobody can do it for as low of a cost. So there's a variety of estimates of different methods of carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere that are, at best, will be 2, 4, 5 times more expensive than what we can do in agriculture. We can do it at scale. We work with the environment very, very closely as we grow crops, raise animals. It's really easy to check our work. We can go out and measure, we can observe, and then it's permanent, or we have some confidence that it's going to be permanent. Other solutions don't have this. And so, ag is high on the list. It's also not high on the list because there's a lot of folks who don't understand agriculture, aren't comfortable with agriculture. So defining carbon offsets, 5 years ago, this was the big thing. It's very much not now. Carbon offsets are credits that a company purchases from someone to offset their own emissions. So for example, this would be, if I'm Disney Corporation, I look within my business, there's not an easy way to decarbonize. But maybe I can pay a farmer to do something. They can get income, I can get those credits, that offsets my emissions. I'm not going to physically do anything differently, but at the financial cost of me purchasing that within the framework we have helps those businesses address their emissions. One of the big challenges with this is additionality, so it has to be something new. Why would Disney pay a farmer to keep doing what they're doing if they can't get credit for it? This is a much bigger deal here in North Dakota because we have so much no-till strip till and the like relative to other places. People have been doing it for 30 years. And so they're typically not eligible to participate in programs like this. This is somewhat hard to take, as there are benefits to those practices. Again, you're actually getting carbon, you're putting it in the soil, but you can't participate in this. And again, for the first, from 2019-ish through 2022, this is by far the place with the most activity. And so that was extra offensive. Really briefly, how are farmers paid? So a third party, a middleman, will come out, contract with a farmer. Essentially, they have a similar construct. They'll pay you for a practice by unit. And so they've already done the math. And so they have estimates that say, if you're no-till, that will capture, that's rough, 400 pounds of carbon per acre. Then they'll map that into that number, give it to what's called the registry. They'll verify it, kind of like proves their claim, and they'll just have a bundle of these and sell them. Again, what you see, what they're buying from you or what they're paying for is this practice, but what they really want is that carbon credit, right? And so one of the things that a lot of folks miss, you're in all these businesses, scope 3s, you don't want to sell your carbon for zero. They're officially paying for the practice. That's what the contract says, but they're also getting credit for that carbon. So if you don't think about that carbon and how it has value for you, it might have value for you and your farm, you're likely going to underprice it. This data is a little bit dated. Purdue does a survey every month of farmers in the Midwest. It's predominantly corn and soybean farmers, but I think it's pretty indicative of what's going on. It's a little bit dated, mainly because this is kind of waning from offsets recently. But if we go back to almost a year ago now, 8% of the corn and soybean farmers surveyed have been in discussions for doing carbon offsets, but only 2% had actually entered an agreement. And about half of those were offered $10 to $30 per ton of CO2. If we map that back to the acre practice, which is what they typically be offered directly, you're talking $2 to $5 an acre, right? And this is basically a non-starter. Most farmers, if they got this far to have a discussion, went $2 to $5, not worth my time. For some reason, that was a surprise to everybody who was doing this. Moving on to carbon insets. So carbon insets are the idea that a business will look at the emissions from their scope 3. And again, you're in a chemical company's scope 3, you're in food company's scope 3. They're very, very concerned. They already have estimates generally of the crops that you produce, what those greenhouse gas emissions would be. They're wrong. But if there's ways that you either already have a smaller carbon footprint than the national average, for example, or if you can make a change that would cause that, that's essentially an inset. And this is much more valuable, much more easy to do because the story's better. Imagine a food company can say, we have farmers in North Dakota who did this. Our carbon footprint is smaller than our competitors. Easier to track, it's a given supply chain, as opposed to doing something in a business somewhere in the world takes credit for it. An example of this, just picking one, there's a few. ADM has a program called Regenerations that's funded by the US taxpayer, or actually it's funded by the CCC, which will then be, that one will be paid off by the taxpayer. Anyways, what they have is a very, very simple program, but it's actually pretty like what we expect to happen in the future. So a list of practices, eligible commodities, and then prices. So if you have these practices for one of those, again, we could say, I guess we have corn and soybeans for the example here, a 2 to 4 cent premium for corn if you're, for example, using just efficient nutrient management. And that's typically whatever the extension service says is efficient. If you do that, something similar to that, you can check the box. If you're no-till, you can check the box. And again, this is really easy in terms of effort. Literally upon delivering, or when you're having those conversations, you say, yes, I'm no-till, and they say, great, here's an extra 4 cents a bushel. We're already seeing things similar to this for folks who deliver to biorefineries, where you make an attestation essentially saying, yes, this crop was produced a certain way. Today, not with the months, not years. And again, the whole idea is that most folks don't do this. Your carbon footprint would be smaller. A business or their customer would value that, providing that incentive. But again, today, this is a government program. Somewhat unique, I work in bioenergy. Bioenergy side has a much clearer way to access true incentives in the market that exist today. And those could be tradable carbon credits that have demand because of policy, or actual tax credits, as is the case with 45Z. What's interesting about this too is you as a farmer don't have direct access, but via your relationship with a refiner, they do have access, and if you have some degree of market power, you should be able to get some of what they receive as an incentive back to you with your farm. Some examples of this, California's low carbon fuel standard. There's a cap and trade mechanism to calculate a price of carbon, a premium for low carbon fuels, which in turn, and they just made it a change a few months ago, farm level practices now count. So if you had a low carbon bushel of corn or of soybean, you delivered it to a biorefinery, they can track. That would generate more carbon credits, which have value. Very, very similar with all of Canada, Canada's clean fuel, I should say, regulation. These are of particular interest. LCFS, North Dakota refineries have long been producing and delivering there. So within your supply chain, even if you don't think about it, it's likely that some of your corn, soybeans, canola have ended up in California. Same thing with Canada, especially on the ethanol side. And then the new one is 45Z, which is a new tax credit. We're waiting for the final rule, but it's almost certain that they're going to provide an incentive for farm level practices. But again, this tax credit doesn't go to you, it would go to the biorefinery. So you would deliver something, a crop with a low carbon or a small carbon footprint, and then if your crop is somewhat unique, and it is, if it's no-till, if it was produced with cover crops, if it was produced with low carbon fertilizers, you should be able to negotiate some percent of that tax credit that they get. I get questions all the time saying, or I'm in the room with biorefiners and farmers, and what they want to say is, well, how much am I going to get? And the answer is silence, right? Because they're not going to put a number out there today. But that's very much, it's essentially here that policy 45Z started on January 1st. Once the rules are out, the biorefineries will definitely be looking to engage with their existing local farmers to find ways to access that tax credit. So I made this hamburger on Monday night. It was a big burger for a big game. Anyways, the issue of stacking is really important. So I've talked about a few different programs, some general, some specific. For the most part, farmers can access various combinations of these programs because that's allowed by the rules. So this could be an NRCS payment for conservation practice. It could be the federal tax credit, which would come via the biorefinery. It could be California's LCFS, in addition to a carbon offset. Again, to me, it was how you build the burger. There's a few different ways. Some aren't allowed, but a lot are. What's tough is we don't know exactly today which ones will work. A couple of market updates. So beginning in 2015-ish, the carbon offset space got pretty active. A number of businesses were created, or a number of existing businesses created functions to get into this offset business. One of the bigger ones shut down within the last year. Ecosystem Market Services Consortium, which is another big player. Initially was in the offset space, has now moved over to just doing scope 3, doing carbon insets. TrueTerra and Indigo Egg. Indigo Egg was the first big mover in this space. They decided that it's easier to work together instead of duplicating efforts. And then with all of this going on, folks in the offset market especially wonder what's going to happen with 45Z. Because 45Z is powerful. And again, if you think about the practice you have on your farm, you do something, it creates value somewhere. Well, in the case of 45Z, it could be significant. It's a federal tax credit, so a law that tax credit will be given. A lot more certainty there than the possibility of a corporation buying a tax credit. And again, we've seen their interest wane, which is one reason why we've seen shutdowns and just a decrease in the amount of business. So those were my prepared remarks. Happy to answer any questions you have. I already said I don't know the price that biorefineries are going to pay for low carbon corn. That'll be something we realize in the next year or so. Yes?
What effect do you think the new administration will have?
Yeah, great question. Let me talk really high level. There was a lot of excitement in all of this space 4 years ago when the current administration came into power. We're now seeing a change in administrations with the other party. There's less interest and support. Exactly how that plays out, we'll have to see. There's been some discussion that they'll get rid of 45Z altogether. It'll be interesting because a lot of on the federal side, again, because that's what they can control. Although there is this shadow. There's an interesting relationship. You know, there's general support from the incoming administration for agriculture as well as energy. The law that this was created under had a lot of friends. Getting rid of this would have, we could call it, positive budgetary effects because you'd be decreasing spending, but it would also be an issue with certain ag folks and certain energy folks. Kind of a vague answer. I would say in general, it's not, the administration will be less supportive of this than the current one. That being said, across all of this, the general trend globally is more policies like this. So even if we see a dramatic pullback at the federal level, long term, this is all still going to happen.
Not sure about this today, but so let's just say farmer was going to do things like no-till or strip till or whatever, and being available for that. The land is rented. Is there anything? Are you familiar with anything regarding the land work on this?
Yeah, so similar questions. It depends on the contract and the law. Relying on our old friend Dave Sikowski, he and Cole Gustafson wrote a note on this a while ago. So obviously anything in the contract that is lawful, that would rule, right? And so you might see agreements that say, from the landowner, you know what? and maybe I'll have a conversation with you. It can't go no-till, it's gonna be no-till. Generally, if it's a common practice, it's the discretion of the renter. You know, I do it according to best practice and I have some flexibility. So if I was in a place where there was no-till and I suddenly started doing no-till, you know, would the landowner have a problem with it? Could they say anything? They could probably say something. But it's one where there's enough gray where it can be a little tough. Again, the guiding things are what's in the contract. That's the very best first place. Look, if you're a landowner, if you want something to happen, put it in the contract, right? Make it clear. And then after that, it's whatever the common, you know, the generally accepted practice is in the region, or what would be considered an acceptable practice in the region. Yes.
Are they going farm to farm taking measurements, or are they just saying you checked this box, we're going to assume you took out X amount?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Sorry, speaker right above
You'll be teleported. Yeah, so do they check? How do they check? And it depends on the program. There is going on with all of this kind of market stuff. There is a whole system of technologies and things that are going to go along with it. We call it MMRV, measuring, monitoring, recording, verifying. And the question is exactly what? Well, so for example, ADM has the check a box, here's 2 cents. Something like that will likely persist. You have to think about the credibility of someone who would say that. Now, let's say that they were paying 10 times that amount of the same supporting evidence. People would say that doesn't make any sense. The carbon offset folks, they typically reserve the right to come and check. We don't know. California, the regulator, they check biorefineries. Right now, all of the crops have the same carbon footprint, so it doesn't matter. They will almost certainly have the option to come and verify. Exactly what that looks like, we don't know because they haven't made the rules yet. It would be the same thing for 45Z. And this is actually, it's interesting for a couple of points. One, because that technology is going to come with a price. What's nice about the biofuel side is there is money in the market to support that happening. The other thing that's interesting about that is we'll also require people with new skills. You know, is this a new person? Is this something that a crop consultant does? And the like. And again, the guidelines are similar guidelines in the industry are pretty robust. So in terms of who gets sampled and when, exactly how that goes, you know, that'll all be figured out. But it would also mean, you know, in Ramsey County, you might suddenly have 5 new jobs of folks who go and do this in various ways. And again, there's different ways. And again, what's the practice? So if the practice is I'm using low carbon nitrogen fertilizer, show me a receipt, right? Maybe give me some evidence of what happened in the field, right? If it's no-till, I can visually inspect, or I don't even need a person there, I can satellite verify that, you know, and the like. I mean, all that's gonna be developed in the coming years with a few folks having a bit of a head start. But I'm officially at time.
We got a break now, so if there's more questions, go right ahead.
That was my out, but anyways, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, never mind, no break.
So the amount of payment, is that, you consider that a proper amount of incentive to change the market?
So yeah, so if you go back to like the carbon offset thing, the $2 to $5 an acre, that's a non-starter. I mean, if I was going to say about the effort I'd have to put in to get $2 to $5 an acre, there's other ways that I'd spend my time. Yeah, and I think that's pretty general. And again, just like casual talking, 10, interesting. 20, sure. 30, yeah. But again, you know, at that $2 to $5, even $10 an acre, nobody's signing up for those offsets. And they're really, again, they're gonna disappear because then you're making a promise to somebody as opposed to just delivering your elevator, right? The relationship is already closer. It will get closer with this. The payment will be what it is, but you're not gonna jump through as many hoops with someone that you haven't done business with for, years. And one of the things that comes across, in this space is that, like businesses don't compete, supply chains compete. What we're really gonna see is regional combinations. So no-till farmers in North Dakota working with their corn ethanol refiners, they're gonna win over folks who don't have no-till farmers. That's a really big advantage. We have access to low carbon fertilizer from the state Dakota Gas, who's been making ammonia and AMS for years. You probably didn't know this, you probably used it. You've used that product. Physically, it's ammonium sulfate and it's anhydrous ammonia, but it's actually low carbon because they've been doing carbon capture for 20 years. And that gives you like this additional advantage. So it's like, what advantages can you find? How unique are they? How much do they cost? And again, there's some things here where we have these natural advantages. How many folks are no-till, have been no-till forever? You're already on the right side of the field, not having changed anything. And of course, there's many fields throughout much of the Midwest, just focusing on that, who, those are not really good candidate fields for doing no-till ever, right? And so you're in the right spot. And again, it's those different combinations. But yeah, the 2 to 5 is, yeah, it is, yeah. And again, so I've given talks like this for 4 or 5 years across the state. Less than this number of farmers have bumped into who've done it. And they did it as a demonstration, just to test it out. And most of those did it 1 year or whatever the length their contract was and were done. And again, the inset thing is so much easier that to me that seems the obvious choice, and that's been kind of reinforced what's been happening with last year with folks changing focus or closing.
So is there going to be any effect to farmers on this carbon pipeline?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So what are I'll call it I just need to move, I'm getting teleported, right? Just remember my rule. All right, if it happens again. Yeah. Yeah, so what are the farm level benefits or costs to a Summit carbon pipeline being built? So I have two hands, so I'll use them both. So on one hand, if you can deliver to a corn ethanol refinery that can do carbon capture and storage, when most of those in the Midwest can't, you don't want to build, generally speaking. We have 2 corn ethanol refineries in the state that have the technology, so Blue Flint, Underwood, Washburn, and then Red Trail. They already have the technology. So again, they're unique. So since they're unique, they can capture value. You can deliver them, you have an advantage that most other folks don't have. Kind of neat. So maybe I would say don't support the pipeline. I would say there's a political dimension to this. There's already concerns that they might end 45Z. If it's 3 corn ethanol refineries trying to lobby Washington to keep that program instead of 130 corn ethanol refineries, you want the pipeline built. The other thing that we don't see is the future. Right now, in order to access these tax credits, you really need carbon capture and storage. I would think about it as your supply chain. Even if you wouldn't get advantages today financially, one of your customers is in a much better spot, which helps you. You might not see another penny, but you might have a more reliable customer. And then two, it opens up what these future doors might be. You close that first door, who knows how long and how many opportunities you might have to forego because that was the decision you made. And again, and that's ignoring all of the property rights or whatever concerns you have, which are, if you're a landowner, also relevant. If you're concerned, you have a bit of a voice. When the project was announced, to me, I thought it was a no-brainer. It would get built rather quickly, and we're a few years into it, and it's facing challenges. It's made a lot of progress in the last couple months, but there's still some major hurdles that has to get past. I think in general, I would, on balance with both my hands, I'd say that it's very much advantageous to agriculture and North Dakota agriculture to have high levels of carbon capture and storage, which means the pipeline is worthwhile. But again, I could be missing things generally or like specific to you. And I also know that there's people who hate it at a very primal level. I've seen some very grounded folks just get unbelievably pissed. And that's fine. I got out of the room as quick as I could. That's their prerogative. All right. Any last questions? All right, if not, thank you.